Thank you, Member Ortiz. Will the recording secretary please give us a roll call, conduct a roll call?
Yes. Committee Member Childers? Present. Committee Member Ortiz?
Present.
Committee Member Owen?
Here.
And Chair Benedetti.
Here. Okay, next we have the public comment period limited to 3 minutes. Since there's no one.
Chair, we have no one present and no one on Zoom who has inquired to speak.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. We're still on Zoom for the public to attend?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Good to know. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the appointment of a chairperson and vice chairperson, and this is it looks like the Assistant City Manager, Mr. Hackelman, will give us a report or recommendation or whatever you want.
Certainly. Thank you, Chairperson Benedetti and council members, or committee members. Yes, for our first item, we have a recommendation that you consider nominations and make appointments for chairperson and vice chairperson for calendar years 2023 and 2024 through January 2025.
Okay. All right. Would somebody like to make a motion?
If you two would like to remain in your positions, I just nominate both and it stays the same.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, it's been
I
moved and
second.
seconded that Mr. Owen be reelected as vice chair, and Mr. Benedetti be reelected as chairperson. Is there any further comment? Okay, looks like this is a roll call.
Committee Member Childers?
Aye.
Committee Member Ortiz?
Aye.
Committee Member Owen?
Aye.
And Chair Benedetti.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the confidence you're placing us there. All right. The next item of business is the minutes from our February 21st, 22nd, 2022 meeting. Gotta get the right years here. And are there any comments, corrections? If not, it looks like we need a motion to approve the minutes for that.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last year.
I second that.
Okay, then we have a roll call.
Committee Member Childers?
Aye.
Committee Member Ortiz?
Aye.
Committee Member Owen?
Aye.
And Chair Benedetti.
Yes. Okay, next we have the overview of Measure U. The Measure U Citizens Oversight Committee will receive a presentation by city staff. In this case, it looks like the Assistant City Manager, Mr. Hackelman, will lead us in that discussion.
Thank you, Chairperson Benedetti. So today, this afternoon, we have for you a presentation. It's an overview of Measure U. I'm going to present some slides to you, and the first 7, I believe, are going to be an overview. You'll have seen these slides last time, but then we're also going to provide for you the actuals. So what was actually spent in our last fiscal year. And after this presentation, Mary Harvey, our Director of Finance, is going to go into detail on the specific line items to describe what's transpired during that period. Okay. So I'll begin here, and we already have in front of us slide number 3. And so this will be familiar to you, but by way of a refresher, during the 2020 to 2022 budget cycle, Measure U estimates for revenues for 2021 and 2022 were expected to drop based on forecasts by about $1.8 million due to economic impacts from COVID. However, consumer spending did not decline as expected, which is a good thing, and Measure U estimate revenues were revised upward by $3.4 million in the 2021-2022 mid-cycle budget review. And so the actual results from the prior fiscal year, 2020 and 2021, allowed for several appropriation increases. In the next few slides here, we're going to see details on those budgeted increases in funding. So the next slide 4 here we'll go through the kind of the categories here for the budgets, the kind of categories for Measure U spending areas. So in the mid-cycle budget increase, for police, we had an increase of $509,000 to $509,215. Funding is restored for the crime analyst position, which is important to our police department, and funding to purchase bulletproof vests and software, which allowed online reporting of low level of crimes, and that was $30,000. And then there were 3 capital projects recommended in the budget to expand the existing fleet to include a vehicle for mental health co-response at a cost of $92,000, remodeling a boiler room for vehicle processing and storage for $40,000, and the purchase of inside-outside locker banks for our PD for $60,000. The next slide is for our fire department. And you can see there the bullet points. If we could advance a couple slides, Rhonda. There you go, right there. So the budget increase came from the mid-cycle here in our fire department at $2.3 million, just over. And we were able to deal with some critical position. So the deputy fire chief position, we unfunded that to fund 2 firefighters that were previously unfunded, and added 1 firefighter position formerly funded by the general fund. And we preserved, and also to preserve staffing for adequate fire and emergency response, the SAFER grant, and matching funding required to comply with this grant. We also added $228,800 in one-time funding to staff a training cadre for an upcoming firefighter academy, along with professional services, personal protective equipment, and training supplies for cadets. Another add was for $526,838 to purchase 1 Type 1 engine plus equipment to replace 1 aging fire engine. An additional $405,000 is funded by the fleet replacement program for that engine. $500,000 to purchase a Type 6 off-road firefighting vehicle to enable our fire department to respond to riverbed fire calls for service due to the unpaved surfaces out there. $111,000 for individually assigned radios, $78,000 for replacement of aging fire hoses, $190,400 for facilities maintenance projects, $164,000 for resurfacing parking lots at the fire stations 1 and 4, and finally, $75,000 towards the design of remodeling the fire station. Next slide, mid-cycle budget adjustments. So here we saw increases in this category for Parks and Rec and our city attorney's office. The budget increase came by way of $383,728 to add 1 park services coordinator, and that position ensures proper law enforcement supervision of staff in the evening, nights, and weekend shifts when that function is quite heavily tasked. Also adding 2 Recreation Leader 2 classifications, 1 Technical Aid 3, and program supplies to conduct after-school and weekend programs at the Menominee Center. Also adding $60,000 to purchase a City Ranger vehicle to cover day-to-day operations of patrol and enforcement at city facilities and parks. In our city attorney's office there, the second major bullet, we added 1 code enforcement officer, which was a new position, and funded the purchase of a vehicle for this position because the code enforcement function is a mobile function. Funding 2 code enforcement officers formerly funded by the general fund. And we also moved a confidential clerk 2 position from Measure U to general fund from the city attorney's office. The next slide is a continuation here in this category for our library. And what happened here is that we budgeted an increase of $29,119. This was recosting of personnel, so kind of due to kind of changes in classifications and what people are being paid. So $19,826 for that. And then $9,293 to cover increases in insurance rates. The next slide here is kind of a roll-up here, Measure U analysis. And this is just a view of what I've described to you. And so you can see here in along the column vector for the Measure U fund analysis, you can see the various functions and the estimated actuals in the first column with figures, and the next column showing originally adopted, the recommended adjustments, which are what I described to you, in a bit more detail, of course, than what's listed here, and then what we proposed in the budget that we revised based on the upward revision of Measure U revenues. And so I can also mention to you that estimated revenues were at $21,800,000 in the third full year of the enhanced 1 cent sales tax. And council authorized Measure U appropriations of $22.4 million, an increase of $3.6 million from the original adopted budget in the 2-year budget cycle of 2020 to 2022. Next slide, please. So this is another view of the same thing, showing here the budget by categories. And you can see there at the top columns, public safety, youth services, and quality of life, kind of breaking down totals there for you, where you can see how those percentages add up across the rows and vertically through the columns. And the intention there is, of course, to show that proportionate distribution of 90%, 5%, and 5%, which you're quite familiar with. All right, so now is some new information. So that was previously presented to you. The new information are our actuals. Mary is going to get into the details, so I'm going to go through this at a fairly high level, but she'll discuss with you what we've learned from this. These are our actuals, but they're not audited financials. So on the first slide here, Measure U revenues and expenses. You can see that we budgeted $21,787,000, and our year-end actuals were a pretty good difference from that, so $3.7 million, which is a good thing. So tax revenues were underestimated, and that's because of the impacts from purchasing and sales transactions happened at a much better rate in Santa Maria than was forecasted. Expenditures are underrun in here, and I know that's a focus of your committee. And these underruns are due to a couple main factors. So incomplete capital projects in the fire department account for a majority, just shy of $1.2 million. And there are vacancies as well. So like every employer in our economy, nationally, but for sure in the state of California and even here in Santa Maria, you know, the labor market is very tight. It's challenging sometimes to find the right people for the right positions. And so we've carried some vacancies that we would, of course, otherwise like to have filled. And so that accounted for some of these underruns here at $881,000. That's, of course, a budget savings, but it's also, those are employees that we were unable to hire. The next slide is a pie chart that shows you a kind of a percentage breakdown of our Measure U expenses. So this is going to be very familiar to you, you know, so police there with 48%, fire next with 37%. And then between rec and parks, our library, city attorney is the rest of that funding. and that's kind of in that youth services and quality of life category. 85% of Measure U expenditures were spent in police and fire. And the reason that the police department and fire department percentage does not match the 91% expended in the public safety category is because some of the rec and parks expenditures, so for park rangers, CMO and finance, are part of public safety category. So you know, if a ranger, for example, is hired in rec and parks, that funding goes there, and it won't be reflected in the percentages for fire and police, which is pretty intuitive, but it's something to point out because that's not shown in this simple graphic. All right, so the next slide, we talk about our variances. And so, you know, our fire underrun by $1.5 million. Like I mentioned a couple of slides ago, this is primarily due to incomplete capital projects, so $1.2 million of that 1.5. So $393,000 for some facility improvements that weren't able to take place, $548,600 for partial funding to replace a pumper engine, and $203,400 for radios and department-specific equipment. Mary's going to get into some of the reasons why, but I'll kind of broadly sketch for you that the reasons for these were supply chain related or related to not having certain planning completed. So they were efforts that staff made, but that due to certain variables, we were unable to accomplish some of these. And the police underrun by $357,000, so 3.6%. Was due to vacancies and delays in making purchases of 2 new vehicles. So vehicles, again, I don't want to go deeply into this because Mary's going to, but supply chain issues. And so the vacancies, on the other hand, the police department has done a remarkable job in recruiting and retaining police officers, and we're catching up significantly. I believe we've hired 29 personnel this past year. But we still have vacancies, and that is reflected in this underrun. The library underrun by $128,000, 17.2%, is due to challenges in filling positions. So theme here. And some of these folks were furloughed during COVID, and lower utilities and custodial costs than we'd expected due to the library unable to be open on Sundays. And again, going back to not having the people to be able to do that. So it was kind of a vicious cycle there. Rec and parks, the underrun of $420,000, is 18%, was due to difficulty in hiring park ranger positions. Although we have hired a couple over this past year, there were still vacancies, and the tight labor market and delays in purchasing vehicles, again, the vehicle and supply chain issues, resulted in those underruns. The next slide is the same information, but by category. And the chart shows that 91% of 2021-2022 expenditures were spent on public safety, 4% on youth services, and 5% on quality of life. The 4% spent in youth services reflect challenges in hiring staff after having to furlough the majority of these limited services positions when the library and rec and park programs were closed because of COVID. So there's this kind of whiplash that's carried itself through the past couple of years. And now I'd like to kind of just talk with you about future Measure U issues. The next slide has a chart there that talks to you about CalPERS, so retirement. This is an ever-changing and fairly complex variable of variables in our city budget, and of course Measure U is part of that. This chart is for 2022 to 2024 budget presentation. $4.2 million increases over 5 years and $9 million over 10 years. And they do not include investment losses from COVID, which will affect rates beginning in 2022 and 2023. We've been addressing this issue. New employees, new tier. So there's different tiers that reflect different percentages of costs to the employer. So those percentages that you see up there are what the city pays towards these pension costs. And this changes every year. I'll not get into a high level of detail because there are hours-long presentations on this, but there are a number of factors that drive this. It's the specific retirement program that a particular tier of employee has based on when they joined the organization. And the changes that are reflected year over year there, you can see starting 2020, 2021 to 2023, 24, those increases, and they're always increases, that reflects underperformance of investments by CalPERS. So all of these things wholly outside of the control of the city. The time at which people retire can't always completely be predicted. And all three of these categories, so miscellaneous being kind of employees that are in administration, doing rec and parks work or working in the library, and then police, and then fire, and these categories, they're all managed separately. And so within police, they're just separate pools of retirement, so they're independent of one another. And even, the estimated actuarial estimated time of, an employee's retired life, so that span at which, it's the average person will be in retirement. So there's a lot of things that happen here to affect these percentages. And the final thing, which is expected to continue, is what's called unfunded liability, and I think that's on the next slide. So we can skip another slide here, Rhonda. I think this shows similar things. I just wanted to point out, of course, that these percentages are continuing to increase for us, but with PEPRA, these numbers are not as significant in terms of increase. So right here, you can kind of see our future issues on a graph. These are these same figures that are reflected on a chart here over time. And the top line there is the roll-up of everything. It's safety and miscellaneous. And then purple is miscellaneous. The yellow line is safety police, and the green line is safety fire. And so they all have this upward linear trend. And so the total CalPERS cost 2022-2023 is $22.1 million, and then 23-24 is $23.3 million. So those are the total CalPERS costs. But then the unfunded liability for each of those years respectively are $13.02 million and $13.98 million. And the percentage of that unfunded actuarial liability is 58.99% and 59.94%, so about a 1% increase. And that 1% increase, when CalPERS raises the discount rate, requiring, this higher level of performance over time, that increases the liability that the retirement system has, which trickles down to the city to require us to pay more into that unfunded obligation. And so we have to budget more money to cover it. And it's not something that the city has any control over. The next slide.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, if I can jump in here.
Sure.
Mr. Owen?
What drives the difference between the police department and fire department's increases? It looks like the line for police is steeper than the line for fire.
See, I can go back here. If Mary has the answer off the top of her head, do you? Well, I can, while Mary's searching for an answer, I mean, these are separate pools, and so the investments, the actuarial variables that are considered, like retirement age, the length of retirement, the retirement tier that those members would happen to be in, all determine that contribution that's made. And so they're separate pools. But Mary?
That's exactly right. They're complete separate assumptions made by PERS that they determine on how they determine the amount of retirement they're going to have to pay out for the life of the participant. And so that's why there are in different pools, police and fire, they just have a totally separate set of assumptions. And in addition, those also, police and fire are in a separate, they're in a pool within the whole state as well. So with miscellaneous, because we have a large group in miscellaneous, we have our own contract, our own set of, they look at just our members, whereas with fire and with police, they're looking at the whole state or all the fire and police organizations that have smaller fire and police departments. And so that affects it some too. So it's very complex, and unfortunately, like Assistant City Manager Hackelman mentioned, it's really out of our control on how those percentages come out. What we have done is that is within our control is getting cost agreements with the different bargaining groups to try to minimize those costs to the city. So we have some shared agreements. But overall, we really are at the mercy of PERS, and their investments is a big one too. When the market is down, it hits our rates a couple years later. Everything takes a couple years for PERS to hit, so sometimes that factors into some of these items as well. So,
Thank you.
So I didn't know if we were holding questions till the end, but I had a couple questions related to that before we move on to the next slide too. But let me ask, do the other members have any questions of Mr. Hackelman right now? Or? So Mike, a couple of my questions. One of them is related to the code enforcement issue. So code enforcement, maybe you can clarify for me, it's still under the city attorney's supervision, but they moved their physical location over to the community development building over on?
Chairperson Benedetti, we actually both moved them from a budget perspective or from an organizational perspective and physically. So they reside at community development building and they're on community development organizational chart, and they're budgeted under community development now.
Okay. I was wondering, because I thought that, but it said city attorney code enforcement on your slide. I didn't know if that was old information or if
those slides reflected the previous fiscal year.
Okay,
And
so this is a new.
And Mary, when she goes through her presentation, will get into a fine level of detail there.
Okay.
And I think I even have a slide that covers a little
That's
bit
okay.
of that.
You clarified it for me.
Okay.
And then the other question also is related to CalPERS. Was the 4.5 million shortfall and the 9 million shortfall, is that just for the employees funded by Measure U, or is that citywide?
It's citywide.
That's a citywide shortfall. So
It is.
So Measure U is funding the city employees that we're funding their pension, the ones that are under the Measure U funding, right?
Yes, sir. So there is a proportion in any given year, some percentage of funding that's contributing to paying for employee costs, equipment costs, capital costs, so it's represented in helping to cover those increases. But yes, that is a citywide, including all of our funds. It's all inclusive.
Because I think Mary will remember, I mean, a few years ago, when we first started this Measure U thing, we didn't fund the pension, but we went back later and corrected that issue, I think. It was,
yeah, thank you. We did have the unfunded liability portion was not included.
right, but,
And that later on, PERS actually did that, changed how they charged the city and organizations. It used to be part of your percentage of your, of every participant. And now they actually give us a dollar amount, so we have two different things. So when they did that, then that's when we started to look at that at a different way of
and then your
that.
discount rate, did PERS recently lower it from 7 to 6.5? Or, I mean, do you know
Yeah, it was increased.
they increased the discount rate? Mm-hmm. To what?
they
Is it 7% now?
lowered.
Oh, it was lowered to
Lowered.
6.75?
Yeah.
6.75?
Well, it's the lowering that causes us to pay
Yeah.
more because
absolutely.
they're telling us that the returns are going to be lower.
Yes.
The discount rates.
On
'Cause
average.
I'm on the SB Sears board, and we just went through like 3 days of actuarial actuaries presenting this information to
Yeah,
us. So we
absolutely.
did the same thing at the county. We lowered our discount rate. Well, did we keep it the same? We might have kept it the same. I think we kept it the same just because we always have this tug of war with the staff, and you guys have the same tug of war, like, okay, you lower the discount rate, then on the county general fund, they're going to pay more. But you don't have any control over it. Here you've got CalPERS telling you, well, we're lowering our discount rate, now you're going to pay more.
Absolutely.
So
And I think it was lowered to 6.8%. Was that what it was?
that was a pretty minor adjustment because they were still on the heels of, pretty good years. It was the best year that they've had in 20-something years, before last year's fiscal, returns the year before that. So it all kind of blends in together, but.
Yeah.
But did I hear you correctly that the state you guys are 59% funded on unfunded liability? Or our percentage of funding is 59%?
As far as what Mr. Hackman was just
The
stating?
total actuarial funded amount for all the projected.
For the obligation?
For the obligation. Is it 80%? Is it, because we're like, the county was 80% funded till this last disaster in the stock market. Now but we're still only like a 78% funded.
My recollection is that kind of during the worst part of it, it was 61% funded.
61?
That's my recollection. And I was at a League of Cities meeting, and I was at a presentation, and I believe they have it close to 80% now, but I'm not 100% certain about that. But they've improved to that position based on what I recall.
And I apologize, but I do not know those off the top of my head for
Yeah.
ours. I do know that each one would be separate, they do it separately. Each, the miscellaneous, the police, and the fire will be funded in separate funding sources of that. But it has increased. It has improved. My recollection is what Councilman, Mr. Ackerman had mentioned. It was about 67%. I think that was miscellaneous, what I recall.
It's a burden. I mean, but at
It
least
is
they
big.
give you that smoothing out period of time to fund it. You're not just coming up with money out of nowhere. You got a budget for it, but you're coming up with it. So, let's see. Those are my notes so far. If we could go ahead and continue on.
Thank you for the questions. So the next slide here are some additional future issues. So insurance costs are increasing. This is a national trend. This isn't just the city of Santa Maria. So we've seen increases in workers' comp hit us at $2.5 million and liability at 2.1. And, these increases are significant for the city budget. One of the things that we've done to try to mitigate this into the future is we have 3 new safety positions because a lot of prevention is, or a lot of our efforts being put towards prevention, risk reduction, will help us to avoid workers' comp issues and general liability claims. And so we're working towards optimizing best practices in the city to make sure that we're focusing on prevention. Next slide, please. So this slide you've seen before too, but it's updated. It just shows you over the past several years and then looking into the future what the cost of an average position is for the city in the categories that we're discussing, so miscellaneous, fire, and police. And those costs are increasing every year, and they're significant, and they drive the city's budget for sure. Next slide, kind of looking at the Measure U fund analysis. All right, so here we go here. We're almost through. We just have a couple more slides, and then you get the real fun detail. So Measure U related revenues are growing and exceeded expenditures in 2020 and 2021 and 2021, 2022, resulting in an expanded fund balance enabling this budget to allocate funding to capital needs. The bulk of the increase in fund balance is from salary savings. Proposed budget for 2022-2023 is going to tap into the fund balance to fund increases in operating costs as well as $3.6 million for capital expenditures. This is because Measure U only has one revenue source that is impacted and that's impacted by the health of the economy, so it's sales tax. And it's allocated primarily to fund ongoing staffing. That's the most significant part of what Measure U is funding. And it's imperative to maintain a healthy reserve in the event of an economic downturn. There's no allowance for additional uses of Measure U tax proceeds, as you know, other than what has already been authorized by City Council. So shifts in code enforcement,
Yeah, there's your,
you can see that there.
yeah.
Okay, so I think that answers that question. And so the next slide here reflects the same information, but by categories of youth, public safety, youth services, and quality of life. And the city council authorized the 90% majority of the Measure U tax proceeds be spent on public safety related services. And then again, 5% on youth services and 5% on programs for quality of life. And in closing here, I wanted to mention that the variances that you see, so kind of the underruns that are happening, those are challenges for the city. And so there's a number of variables that frankly aren't in the city's control. We can't control the supply chain. We can't control the labor market. But there's always ways to improve. There's always ways that we can kind of look at our processes. Your committee is charged with providing oversight. And so, you know, in discussions within city staff, it occurs to us that, you know, one of the variables that we potentially can control for, that would require us to do some research, is potentially to map out a bit, because we're budgeting down, we're choosing the constraint of our budget, right? To say, we're gonna fund this position, we're gonna fund this fire truck, and if and when one of those things doesn't happen, then that results in an underrun. And it may not be the city staff's fault. It could be the supply chain or the labor market. But if we had the opportunity maybe to map out a little bit, it'd be something we'd have to look at, but looking at this at a programmatic level, so kind of zooming out a little bit, looking at programs versus specific line items in a budget, could perhaps allow more degrees of freedom for executing on Measure U funding, so that the needs that the community's identified, the purpose of Measure U, that those needs that have been identified can be executed or more likely to be fully executed in the year in which they're planned and budgeted. So that's a potential idea for your committee to consider as a recommendation. But that concludes my presentation, if you have any questions for me.
So maybe Ms. Harvey will be going over it, but a lot of times we like to get some kind of interim report on how, because you're talking about numbers that are ended in June of last year, and we just finished halfway through the fiscal year of this year, so maybe you'll be addressing it in your report. I'm just kind of curious, because we were asking in the past to get some type of an interim report sent to us, which we still, I'm sure, I would like to get that interim report just to see how we're doing with the budget compared to the new 2023 fiscal year end that we're dealing with. So, do we have any other questions for the Assistant City Manager? No? Okay. Okay, so, Mary, Ms. Harvey, you're gonna continue on then for the same, oh, you're on number 4 now. Are you number 4? No, that's the financial statement.
That's the same. Yep.
You're budget, you're agenda item 4 right now.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hockelman.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, committee members. First, I would just like to address your one question that you had, Mr. Benedetti, and that is we will be doing a quarterly report, the second quarter report on the Measure U at our next meeting. We typically do it at the next meeting. So this meeting, we focus on the previous year, and then the next meeting, we will add in the quarterly report, which will give you that, how we're doing for that 6 months of this year.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. So I will go ahead and get started here. Let's see. Oh, do I have to do this? What's that? I'm trying to go in the wrong way. That's it. Okay. All righty. So tonight I will present the 21-22 Measure U draft unaudited financial statements for the fiscal year ended of June 30th, 2022. The draft statements were prepared by city staff and are currently with the city's auditors, Moss Levy, Hartsheim, the certified public accountants. When the audit is complete by Moss Levy and Hartsheim, they will prepare and issue final audited Measure U financial statements, and those statements will be provided to the Measure U Oversight Committee at a future meeting. Staff does not expect any material changes to the draft financial statements as a result of auditing procedures, and the unaudited financial statements represent the Measure U financial transactions in fiscal year 2021-22. So first I'll go over the costs that, excuse me, let me just this slide shows that the budgets were, the approved budget was $22,429,597, and we had some budget carryovers that occurred, and those budget carryovers were, there were 3 budget amendments that were made to the budget during the year. The police department requested a budget carryover of $21,548,000 to complete the purchase of equipment for police vehicles, and $683 in contracts and services budgeted to fund a portion of the police records management assessment contract. The fire department requested capital appropriations carryover of $24,629 to equip fire vehicles received in the previous fiscal year, $10,221 for payment of previously ordered wellness equipment for firefighter personnel, and $9,235,000 to pay for operational gear, including turnouts, personal protective equipment, and fire hoses ordered but not received in 2021. Recreation and Parks requested a capital budget carryover of $8,118 to purchase equipment for park ranger vehicles. Including the budget carryovers in 2021-22, appropriations increased to $22,510,271. Turning to the financial statements, the first statement is the balance sheet, and it is as of June 30th, 2022. The balance sheet shows balances of assets, liabilities, and fund balance at a point in time. As of June 30th, 2022, Measure U's total assets were $18,032,118 and are comprised primarily of cash and investments in the amount just over $13,209,000. Accounts receivable of about $4,786,000, which represents sales tax earned in May and June, but not received until July and August respectively. And prepaid items of $36,222 for invoices paid in fiscal year 2021-22, but services and training that will occur in 22-23. Moving on to the next section, total liabilities are $1,124,171. Accounts payable are for goods and services received in 2021 but not paid before June 30th, 2022. The accrued liabilities are payroll costs for the pay period that straddles June and July. Total assets less total liabilities equates to a fund balance of $16,907,947. On the next page is the statement of revenue and expenditures and changes in fund balance. The total revenues are $25,502,203. It is mostly from sales tax. Total expenditures are $19,848,284, with 91% being spent on public safety related items, 4% on youth services, and 5% on quality of life. Revenues exceeded current year expenditures by $5,653,919, resulting in an increase in fund balance from $11,254,028 to $16,907,947 at June 30th, 2022. On the following page is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, budget, and actual. This is extremely small on the screen, so I've broken it up into sections to make it a little easier to follow. So, yes. Page 4 of the draft, yes. But it's on the screen, it's broken up in smaller pieces if you would like, but it will follow it right down to help. Okay. Again, measure use sales tax receipts came in at $25,934,795 and exceeded revenue estimates by 19.2%, or about $4.2 million.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Ms. Harvey. Now, the city employs a consulting firm to to assist in those projections of the sales tax, don't you? Is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
we use HDL
Yeah.
Associates, yes. And they assist us with making those,
And was there
forecast.
comments about that revenue? Was the city of Santa Maria unique, or was just California in general just did really well? Or
In general, California did well, and City of Santa Maria did better than average for overall in the state.
And do you think that was a result of all the new retail establishments that came online in the last 24 months? I guess that's be part of it, right?
Could be part of it. There's different factors that go into it, but we did have a good showing in a lot of the categories. So
Is the largest driver of the percentage sales tax the car dealerships?
it's a good portion. I don't have the percentages offhand, but it's a large portion, yes.
Because I know that they, besides the supply chain issues that they've been having, it just seems like that all the new dealerships got up and running and the facilities were operating. Then the used cars were in different locations, but
The car dealerships and fuel prices increased. Those were all big items
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
true.
And when we have commuters, that's part of it too. So there's a lot of different variables. And I think that the autos and transportation category in particular, they anticipated overall that would be a decline because of the COVID and because of different things, and it actually was not. So that there was.
My retail clients in my CPA practice, and I'm just one tiny little CPA, they have all experienced increase in sales, but mainly because of inflation. Because if you don't raise your prices, you go out of business. So because everything else costs more. So even the used car dealerships that I have had sold fewer units, but had more sales than they've ever had in terms of total dollars.
Yep.
So inflation was definitely a factor in all that too. So,
Yep.
Which is pretty substantial the last 24 months.
Yes, definitely. I'm sorry. That's okay. And I do note in here that we did have, our biggest variances were due to the growth in the fuel and service stations was our largest, but also in restaurants and hotels have come back, and autos and transportation industries grew. The one category that didn't grow was our state pools, our allocation from our state and county pools, which compared to the previous year. And in the previous years, of course, we were all COVID, and so there were a lot more online purchases, so our county pool and our state pools went up during that time.
The Wayfair
So-
decision money? Yeah,
And
we
that-
talked about that last time, yeah.
And that too, yeah, so we had a combo of that. So this last year, that dropped some because people started going out, and actually buying things in the stores. and
Not as
returning
much
back.
online.
Not as much. So, let's see. And then, the sales tax revenues were offset by use of money and property of a decline of about 452,000. And that's as a result of recording the change in value of investments as of June 30th, 2022. And that's something that's required from an accounting standpoint. We have to record the value of our investments as that date. Even though we didn't sell them, even though we didn't have our true loss, we have to show that. And so that's what that decline was from, because the market had a significant decline in the previous year. Going on to expenditures side of the house, the total expenditures were $19,848,284 and came in at $2,661,000 or 987,000, or excuse me, $2,661,987 or 11.8% under budget. The expenditures in the legal department are for 5 code enforcement, code compliance officers, and is under budget by about $277,000. The largest portion of the underrun, $214,000, is in salaries and wages, and because of 3 code enforcement officer positions that were vacant. 2 of those positions were filled in August of 2022 with code enforcement technicians who are training to become code enforcement officers. In addition, $60,000 capital budget associated with one of the vacant positions was not expended in 21-22. In the city manager's office, they expended just over $9,600 toward ongoing support of the city's mass telephone notification system, and is under budget by about $10,400. The underrun is due to the prior year transaction recorded as an expense that should have been recorded as prepaid item. The finance expenditures include the final levy loan payment of $106,129. The city council authorized in 2012-13 the levy loan to fund needed repairs in the Santa Maria River levee. Measure U began funding the levy loan payments in 2013-14. Expenditures included in the Measure U are the Measure U audit services, which were slightly more by $84 than what was budgeted. The library, next slide. The library expenditures are for personnel and utility costs associated with the main library staying open longer hours, Monday through Saturday, 8 additional hours from 48 to 56, and opening 4 hours on Sunday. Overall, library expenditures are under budget by $128,140, or 17.2%. The underrun is primarily due to difficulty in hiring staff after having to furlough the majority of limited service positions when the library was closed because of COVID. Material and supplies and contract services are under budget, nearly $34,000 and $9,000 respectively, because of lower utility and contracted custodial costs due to the library being closed on Sundays. Recreation and parks expenditures are under budget by $420,367. The bulk of the underrun, 179,200, is in salaries and wages. The tight labor market has made it difficult to fill park ranger program positions. In addition, and similar to the library, it has been challenging to fill previously furloughed limited service positions. $6,900 or 5% budget savings were achieved in material and supplies. Contracts and services is under budget by about $106,000, primarily due to fewer youth service programs being offered in the summer of 2021 than had originally been planned, primarily because of the lingering COVID restrictions. Capital budget included $120,000 for 2 new park ranger vehicles, as well as $8,100 for program equipment. No expenditures were incurred for those items in 21-22. Overall, on the fire department is under budget by approximately $1.5 million or 16.8%. The fire inspector and fire prevention positions were vacant a portion of the year, causing salaries and wages to be about 4.2% under budget, and accounts for about $264,000 of the department's underrun. Roughly 53% of the cost of 9 firefighters under the SAFER grant were funded by Measure U in 21-22. About 82% will be funded of those costs will be funded in 22-23, and they should be fully funded by Measure U in 23-24. Materials and supplies are under budget by $9,500 due to personal protective equipment and turnouts ordered but not received until after June 30th, 2022. Equipment and operations are under by 4.5% or $18,800 due to fewer repairs and maintenance of department equipment than expected. Contract services are under budget by $31,900 because training continued to be limited due to COVID. Capital is under budget by nearly $1.2 million and is primarily due to incomplete projects, including $393,000 for facility improvements, $548,600 for partially funding to replace 1 pumper engine, and the delay on that is just it took a longer time to determine the specs for that vehicle, and then also in the supply chain, just being able to order vehicles has been challenging for our fleet department overall, finding them, and and obviously we want to get the right vehicle when we do that, so that's why it took longer on the specs. It has been ordered. It was ordered as of August 9th of 2022. So now we're just waiting for it, which will probably take a while because they're long lead items. In addition, fire department was underrunning capital by $203,400 for radios and department equipment, and again, supply chain issues have caused those. Capital expenditures do include $503,000 that was to purchase 2 new Type 6 engines, and $31,000 for personal protective equipment, and $30,000 for replacement of flooring at the fire administration building. Then I'm going to skip to the next one because this is where the change was and why I revised something. So in the police department, I realized when I was going through my script and trying to determine all the different changes that we had some amounts reversed on the categories. So you can see here on this particular slide, if you want to look up at the slide, the original one we had at the top here, we had materials and supplies amount was reported on the equipment and operations line and vice versa on that. And then also on the capital and the cost allocation transfer out, those were on the wrong lines. So if you look
they
at,
actually They actually gave us that slide in our packet,
Yes.
so. yeah.
Okay, great. So you have those, and so that is the, that was the difference, so I wanted to just point that out of what it did. It did not change anything in the totals or within the department, just within those categories, so I apologize for that, those being on the wrong line. Oops. Okay, so going on to the police department's actual results. The police department is under budget by about $357,000 or 3.6%. Salaries and wages are underrun by $139,000 or 1.6%, and that's due to various positions being vacant for portions of the year. Police had small budget savings in materials and supplies due to lower uniform costs than expected. The underrun of $27,700 in contract services is associated with the low-level crime online reporting software implementation agreement that was incomplete at the fiscal year end. Capital is under budget by $106,000 due to delays in making a purchase of a new mental health vehicle, and as well as outdoor lockers. And $9,200 is for low-level crime online reporting software, the program itself. Police capital expenditures include $26,900 for an assessment of property and evidence area in preparation for remodeling the boiler room for a vehicle processing and storage project, and $7,400 for equipment for vehicles purchased in the previous fiscal year. Overall, Measure U expenditures totaling $19,848,284 is $2,661,987 under budget. And when you combine that with the total revenues of $25,502,203, results in a surplus of $5,653,919 for the year. That surplus increases the fund balance from the $11,254,028 to an ending balance of $16,907,947. As I mentioned earlier, when the audit is complete, Moss Levy and Hartzheim will issue final audited Measure U financial statements, and the audited financial statements will be provided to the Measure U committee, most likely at the committee's next meeting. Staff does not expect any material changes to the draft financial statements as a result of those audit procedures, and the unaudited financial statements presented this evening represent the Measure U transactions in fiscal year 21-22. That concludes my report. I'm available for questions.
Just a quick comment. So just to give you an idea how much of a blessing this is. So I have the audited report for June 30th of 14, when we used to have a 1/4 sales tax, and it was $4 million we raised that year to pay for this. So $25 million is certainly a blessing. I tell you that. That was just an aside. So
Yeah.
I'll be an historian for our group here. So. We have questions. Member Owen, questions?
No questions for me, thank you.
Member Ortiz?
No questions for me.
What the item is calling for is an either or for on page 3 of 17, items 5A and 5B, to prepare the written report for the city council and to identify the date, time, and location, or to accept inquiries from committee members. Well, we accepted inquiries from committee members and report back. So unless there's nobody that wants to make any substantial changes here, I think Ms. Harvey already found the police slide presentation. Then it looks like we're going to be making a motion for 5A and 5B. You have your agenda there, don't you? Yeah, okay. You want to make that motion? Page 3 of 17, at the top of the page. So you could just move that we, and you could look at those two items and move that we adopt that if you want.
So I move that we adopt, is it 5A and 5B?
That's what I'm recommending.
Okay.
So, okay, so do you feel that we need to read that out into the record, Ms. White?
No, however, I do want to make one correction to the agenda. It actually
Okay.
should read 4A and 4B.
I'm sorry, 4A and 4B,
And that
okay.
is
So the
our-
maker of the motion will accept that as a 4A. We're on item 4, I think, okay, now I see what the
Yes.
numbering system was all about there. It was
Sorry.
I didn't know if you had
was
some
a
other
correction.
numbering system.
Apologies, it was
So
once
4A
5.
4A, I think it's just a ministerial correction. Okay, 4A and 4B, as are presented in our report, are the recommendations, just to paraphrase, that we do recommend the written report for the city council as presented here tonight. And then the second part of that is to identify a date, time, and location. What's our budget for the location? I guess I want to ask you.
I believe,
Yeah, that goes.
I believe Finance Director Mary Harvey's already identified a date, if it works for the calendars of the committee, which is February 27th at 5:30 here in council chambers.
Is that a Monday night?
In person, yes, yeah, it would be a Monday.
All right, that is not the day I'm taking my grandkids to Disneyland, so that'll work out for me.
That was 5:30 again?
Yes.
Okay.
So if 5:27 works, then if you will incorporate that in your motion as
Definitely.
well.
Okay.
And that was
Great.
seconded also? Okay.
Okay, so February 27th, 5:30 PM, Monday night for the 4B, identifying the time. That's in the motion now. And is there any other comments by staff before we vote on that motion?
And there
We'll
are
have a
no
roll call.
requests to speak either.
What's that?
There are no requests to speak on this item either.
Okay. All right, so, Ms. White, roll call, please.
Committee Member Ortiz?
Yes.
Committee Member Childers? Committee Member Owen?
Aye.
And Chair Benedetti?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is chair and committee member items. And I kind of jumped the gun there because I was going to give you the historical reference from $4 million to $25 million, so. Big deal. Well, that was that whole 1% thing, increasing from 0.25%. But even then, I mean, 4 times 4, it still would have only been 16 million. So a lot has gone on since 2014. So anyways, good job. A lot of stuff going on. I mean, Mr. Hockelman, maybe you can come back to us next time. It wasn't, I didn't take lightly of the comment you made about looking at the budget and funding on programs versus specific items, but that's kind of a very broad statement you made there, and I would just have a lot of questions about what that means, but you don't need to get into it tonight. So I heard you made an interesting comment there, so maybe next time you might clarify what that might mean, so in reality.
Chair Benedetti, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. I think we can probably have some discussion at our next gathering.
Okay.
But thank you for your
The next one is
comments.
generally a very short meeting because we're looking at audit report on numbers that we already all went into, a little over an hour tonight, so. So we might have a few more minutes, so. Let's go around the table and see if we have any comments from the committee members. Ms. Ortiz?
No comments.
Mr. Childers?
I thank everyone for your report. Excellent job to kind of make our jobs a lot easier. I do thank you for that.
Mr. Owen?
I want to thank the staff for everything they do to put this together. There's so many numbers here, my head spins every time I read one of them. And I'm relatively good at math. I did take a business math class at Hancock 25 years ago, but, and the other thing, again, I don't think I'll ever let this go, that 74% of the community said, yes, I want you to raise my taxes. And staff has done an amazing job taking all of that money and doing exactly what they told the community they were going to do, the percentages that council set down, and it's just, I'm glad I was born and raised and still live in Santa Maria.
There you go. Did your son move out of Santa Maria? The one that played roller hockey with my kids?
No.
He's still here? Yeah. Good. So he recognizes the value here too. So, all right, good. All right. Well, that's been great. I echo everybody's comments. It's a lot of work to put all this together. But in a lot of ways, we're like the dry run for the city council presentation, so you can work all the bugs out of things. So anyways, good job, everybody. That's that. Any announcements from the staff before we leave? No? You good? Okay, all right, we'll adjourn, and we'll see you on February 27th. Thank you.